Welcome, or welcome back, everybody. For those of you who are joining us for the first time this morning, I'm Beth Schultz, Enterprise Connect Program Co-Chair, and I am excited to introduce our first Enterprise IT panel of the conference. In conversations with the Enterprise Connect Advisory Board and other IT professionals we talk to throughout the year, we know that these can be very trying times for people. The cloud, mobile first, artificial intelligence, it's all coming at you fast and furious. And as your organization's technology shepherds, you've got to make sense of it all to drive into the future successfully. One of the trends we've been watching for a few years now is the rise of the communications API and the transition from communications as a hardware decision to one about software. You'll hear many technology discussions about this throughout the week, of course, but here we want to explore what this trend means for the IT organization itself. How do you assemble a team that not only understands how to deliver and support real-time communications, but also knows how to leverage communications APIs for advancing digital transformation goals? How do you break down the barriers among disparate IT disciplines and work with the business? The gentlemen sitting beside me are leading their organizations down this path and here to share their experiences and best advice. So without further ado, let me introduce my panelists. At the right of the stage, I have Carmine Lizza, who is the CIO of Lazard, which is an asset management firm, correct?
Investment banking and asset management.
Investment. Daryl Jackman, who is business automation developer with Marine Rescue Technologies. And Ben Wolf, who is team lead communications technology at Quicken Loans. So let me start out with a question for all of you. Actually, it's kind of a trio of questions. What is a developer-focused future mean for your organization? How did the company arrive at this point? And can you share an example of how this is playing out?
Yeah, absolutely. I can start up. So one thing that's helpful to understand about Quicken Loans is that we're actually a technology company that happens to also be the nation's largest mortgage lender. So we have 2,000 dedicated technology team members to support over 17,000 team members overall. So for us, innovation is absolutely a key component to our approach to the market and how we drive the industry. So we started off by offering Mortgage in a Box, which was our first product. And then by 1999, we were online offering mortgages. So jump ahead to today, and we have the Rocket Mortgage product. That's an app that you can create a mortgage in less than 8 minutes on your phone. So the developer-focused culture for us is absolutely critical to how we succeed in our industry.
And before we move on to Daryl, let me ask you, did Quicken Loan found itself as a technology company, or is that something that it sort of morphed into?
Well, we certainly didn't found ourselves as a technology company, depending on how you define technology, right? We're talking about the 90s and the pre-dot-com boom. So we have absolutely been a leader in innovation, and that has been the core tenet that has driven us to be a technology company at this point.
Okay. Daryl, how about you? Developer-focused future, what does it mean for your organization? How did you arrive at this point? And give us one example.
Sure. We also started as a technology company first, but started mostly in premise. So development wasn't as big as some other areas, such as infrastructure and IT management in general. And then when we started moving to cloud platforms, it was a real change in paradigm. We had to reevaluate how our logistics worked, how our hiring worked, and trying to find the right people to be open-minded and on top of the leading technologies has also been one of our challenges. But a big example for us of one of the changes it made was once we moved to API platforms or open platforms, it opened the doors for what we could do very differently compared to being just premise system. So having us be able to reach a crowd that we never could before, selling things through the cloud, and it was quite an interesting challenge for us.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about Marine Rescue Technologies for those in the audience who aren't familiar with it, so we have sort of a basis for where you're coming from.
Sure. We actually have marine safety is where we started, and these were electronic devices and an IT system used on premise to track people in an emergency, say on an oil rig or a nuclear plant. And it was a very important, critical system, but very limited in the sites that could use it and who could benefit from it. So as soon as we moved to a communications platform, specifically the Avaya CPaaS, all of a sudden we had a very niche product that we would only fulfill over 8 to 12 months. And now we can have a cloud-based platform that can reach every country, and we can do it in a couple of hours. So that was an amazing change for us, very, very different than what we were used to.
Okay. Carmine, DeveloperFocused Future?
So just real quick, Lazard is a global asset manager, and we call ourselves an investment bank, really financial advisory. We have about $225 billion under management. And I find it interesting that the focus on APIs and application development-centric future is interesting because to me, and maybe it's a function of the financial services industry, it's always been a combination of hardware, software, and I go back to kind of my undergraduate work, as effectively a software engineer. And I've always felt that the best solutions, whether you build them internally or you integrate them through other services in the broadest sense, is all about bringing together good software design and architecture. We made a decision, I'd say, about a dozen years ago to move away from a lot of internally bespoke development and go to what you would typically call SaaS today, but third-party solutions that really fit to the greatest degree we could make it work, products off the shelf and integrate with those. And that served us really, really well. In the last 18 to 24 months, we're still doing that, but we're going back a little bit to more development, but targeting really the cloud platforms, Azure and AWS. So we're at a pretty interesting point of kind of inflection here, where we've got, I hate to use the term legacy, because that implies, I'm not going to be derogatory to any large old line technology company, but some really old platforms. Our legacy platforms are 10 years old. They're not 20 or 30. They're not big mainframes. But there's a real a battle almost going on between how do you continue to make sure your organization is forward-looking, you can attract and retain the best people, embrace Azure, embrace AWS, but still run your global organization. So again, I think it's always been about app dev, but app dev is pointless without the infrastructure, and I think the healthiest organizations bring those together. That's a rambling answer to your question, I think.
Okay. So you're obviously coming from the top of the IT ladder, as it were, driving the move back into an app dev kind of mentality at Lazard. And then I'm curious for Daryl and Ben, you're not CIOs yet, guys, but maybe one day. But what's your role in all of this too? Why are you sitting on this stage here? Carmen, you want to go first?
Why are they sitting here? They're going to be CIOs in the future. I don't think we're embracing a full app dev model, right? But we see that the ability to fill the gap between what we can buy and integrate. And we were talking earlier, we were sitting in an earlier panel, and there's an amazing number of products out there that have a tremendous amount of overlapping functionality, and none of them really fill the full gap of requirements, right? So we're having to fill the void ourselves with a new generation of application development talent that we've not had to pursue in the past. It's going to be very interesting. I really envision that we will be, over the next few years, largely running in Azure and AWS because of the agility it gives us. And I don't mean that from an agile development framework, but just speed to delivery, speed to market, and the people that will allow us to attract. And one thing that's a little bit different is our business is not selling technology, right? We're managing people's money, and we're advising them on mergers and acquisitions and government restructurings, for example. But the technology is what enables our business people, our business partners to accomplish those goals. So we have to be as aggressive and agile as a tech company to stay current and abreast of the marketplace, because we're competing with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and other large firms, and we're a bit smaller than them. So technology is really critical, but it's really about speed to delivery for us.
Okay. Daryl, how did you take on this role within Marine Rescue Technologies?
Well, my background has always been technology, programming, and integrating different systems, which in the past typically meant integrating physical premise systems. And then when we moved into the cloud, again, it was a very different change of thought, but my main responsibility was trying to choose what existing platforms And as you mentioned, it's a combination of software and hardware, largely, or at least it used to be, but now we found it's almost exclusively software or APIs, at least for our solution, and we were able to get away from hardware almost completely. So my main responsibility is trying to look at the different systems out there, platforms and APIs, and actually cherry-pick which ones would go together to form a full solution, rather than us having to develop all the functionality from scratch. And let's face it, there are some really powerful APIs out there now that certainly we could not even come close to developing. And if they didn't exist, we wouldn't even have the product that we sell today. So my main responsibility is finding these APIs, being up on the technologies out there, and then deciding which ones to integrate to make our full solution.
Ben, how did you usher this change, or how are you trying to usher kind of a change in thinking at Quicken Loans?
Yeah, thanks. So my background is actually in e-commerce software development, so I came to this industry a little bit different. But one of the things that really became a critical skill and a really important framework for us was the Agile framework in software development. So the underpinning of that system, as I see it at least, is the cross-functional team as the backbone and the core of that approach. And I think you can always do better and have more cross-functional teams. You can have more people who are empowered to solve problems and own them from inception to completion. So that's one of the things that I really spend a lot of time working on with Quicken Loans, and Quicken Loans empowers all of its leaders to make sure that we're delivering that message to our teams.
Okay. You kind of touched on a couple of things there that I wanted to follow up on. One is skills. What new skills are required as companies begin to look, into the cloud for their communications, into an API model for communications? What are the different skills we need? And then speaking to your point about cross-functional teams, what other disciplines within an organization, within the IT organization, does this sort of developer-focused world involve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first one that occurs to me, the first kind of couple, I see them as two sides of the same coin, and that is enterprise architecture and also product management. So coming from the tech side, the enterprise architects are really able to push a service-oriented architecture strategy where we can actually put in front of our team members the information and the tools that we've developed in a way that they can use it very quickly. They sit down to solve a problem, and in 30 seconds, they're able to understand our service contract and take advantage of the tools that they need to get that done. So jumping over to the business side, we have the product managers who are able to help understand the tech side enough that they can usher our business needs to the applications that we have and the services, the microservices that we offer them to help solve their problems.
Okay. Carmine?
Actually, one of the things you just mentioned, I think, is a real interesting challenge for us right now. We're hiring a lot of, I think, talented development professionals that are coming out of school with great depth of knowledge in specific spaces, but they really, in our organization, don't quite grasp why they're working in a financial services firm in our case, right? So that, the skills that I think the people that are joining now need to develop is that understanding as to why you're even in this organization, right? You can work in probably any of the organizations that people in this audience are in today to do the development work, the architecture work. But educating, I think there's two gaps in knowledge. One is what is the business you're actually part of? Why are you doing the work you're doing every day? And what I'm seeing more and more is technology for technology's sake, not necessarily in the delivery, but in the discussions. And I remember I'm going back when I first joined Lazard as the CIO of the asset management business. I used to, it's kind of almost repeating itself. I used to pull people out of their cubicles and say, "Come with me. Let's go meet some other people that are in our organization." So I think it's not even a technical skill gap, but it's a what are you trying to, why are you doing the things you're doing every day? What's the end goal? And then I think the other thing goes back to security, right? So we talk a lot about DevOps, and we're embracing DevOps in some of the parts of the organization. What I'm trying to get people to say internally is DevSecOps, right? So we got a lot of people that we've brought in from outside of financial services, in startups in many cases, who, it's not that they don't consider security, but it's not a paramount focus. in our organization, it has to be the front of mind all the time. So educating, getting an understanding of why it's important to do secure development. Why, when you're speaking to partners, right, whether it be any of the products that are in the hall here, right, asking the right questions about information security, privacy, who can see our data in your hosted solution, your SaaS solution, your cloud solution, and ultimately how can we integrate with it securely from the beginning of an application design? How do I think about the security pieces of it? And that's a tough one because I think most folks that are coming out of school aren't getting that background, and folks that are working in again, startups, different non-regulated industries, it's not as front of mind. So I'm not quite sure what you do about that, other than build your own strong internal program around education there. I'm not quite sure if I kind of went off on a tangent there, but what you said just kind of triggered it in my head.
No, and you hit a lot of good points there. And what we found was, for talent, is that with software development, there were a lot of typical software developers that have been around for many years, but those skills didn't necessarily automatically translate to cloud development. So it's a very different paradigm as far as the project management aspect, going from traditional project management to something agile. That was a very big change. But also the development cycles are very, very different in cloud versus something that was more premise-based that had software with it. So finding a software developer now it's trickier than it seemed like it was years ago, because with a cloud developer, they also need to have practical knowledge of the solution that they're developing for. And what we found many times is a developer who was very skilled and had very good education in development didn't always necessarily understand the use case clearly. And sometimes it took us in the organization years to become experts on the use cases and the subject matter. But developers coming in, they could write code to meet the specs given to them, but in some small ways miss the mark because they don't quite understand the practical application. So providing that education was very important. And you definitely hit the nail on the head with security, because developers, especially many that we've talked to, security isn't always first. So they learn functionality first, and then security becomes an afterthought. And with today's climate, especially going from premise to cloud, security should be first and foremost, security and privacy, because when you have a premise system that's closed, security is not the same as a cloud, because the attack surface is a lot smaller or almost non-existent in some cases. But as soon as you expose your system to the general public, now the attack surface is very high. And with anything on the internet, even things like botnets that go around and scan systems, you don't even have to be a target by someone in particular. You can be a random target by a botnet that's been roaming the internet for 10 or 20 years. So definitely the difference in developer skills between premise and cloud and the security side have been two battles we've had to fight.
Can I just add just really quick to that? One of the things I'm seeing, because security should be front of mind, because to do that properly, you really need to look at your data, you need to categorize your data. It's tedious work in many cases, especially from an application developer. And I remember when I first got out of school, I worked for a defense subcontractor right out of school, so a lot of regulatory control stuff was kind of beaten into my head, immediately. But the fact that a developer may not be able to use the open source tool they want to use, right? Or they have to go through somebody who has said, okay, these pieces of information you must encrypt. It's kind of a running joke. Well, maybe they don't find it funny. I do. The old idea of a swear jar, where you used to put $1 in if you said a swear word. Well, I've told them by this summer I'm going to create a blocker jar. I don't like the word blocker. Right? This word gets thrown around a lot, I think, in the industry now, because I've done my piece, but I'm being blocked by this other group, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a real problem I see right now. It's just, I'm not sure what's happened. You're seeing the same thing, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of goes back to not understanding the why, right?
Yeah.
That we have to always be driven by the use case or the why that's pushing us forward. So one of the things that I think really helps us is focusing on that cross-functional team, because I think one of the ways that this kind of creeps up is when we're able to push things to another team. When we say, hey, I've checked out, I've completed my part, and pass it along to the next to the next player. So to the extent that we can keep all of that work centralized inside of the team, we can really kind of continue there's nowhere to hide. You have to understand the why, and you have to get it all the way to the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, some of the tactics I've taken in projects that have kind of hit a wall in that space is I've taken, for example, our CISO, and I've made him part of the delivery team, right? So that his organization, right, can't be seen as an impediment or anything negative. He's part of the solution, right? Infrastructure, even though if it's a cloud delivery in Azure at AWS, I mean, people seem to think that there's no infrastructure properties to that. Well, it's still infrastructure, it's just being managed differently. So bringing those leaders together and saying, this is your problem to solve, I think helps address the why piece, because then there's a clear set of people that you have to come back to and get an answer to that. And ultimately, collectively, you're creating that cross-functional team for delivery. But it's a real challenge.
What about the involvement in the role of our traditional networking and our voice communications folks? What are you generally seeing the roles there and the acceptance of this sort of new model and kind of getting them over the hump and adopting a new mindset? Ben, you're nodding your head there. You have some thoughts?
Maybe I'm overly expressive with my my communication feedback, but yeah, I do have some thoughts. So I feel like this question is a little bit overhyped. So and the reason that I say that is because just think about your routing folks that you have out there, right? So their whole goal is to understand why people have come and route them through a series of decisions to where they need to be, right? That mindset is absolutely congruous with what it takes to become a successful developer. And you actually look out into the software industry, and you see a lot of these products like Demandware, which is a competitor in the e-commerce space, to Magento, who's actually going to a graphical user interface for the developers to actually do their work. I know we have a lot of ideas about the matrix green code coming down the screen, like that terminal view, and that's absolutely part of it. But increasingly, people are going to that graphical user interface, and I really believe that there will continue to be a role for the talent who we have on our teams in a developer-focused future.
Is there anything in particular that Quicken Loans is doing to sort of help develop that and kind of speed that conversion?
Yeah, absolutely. So this, it all comes down to investing in those folks, right? So you have to be sure that you have the organizational backing to actually take the time to present new opportunities to your existing people, because I do believe that they will jump up and take the reins if given the opportunity. So some of the programs that we're doing, we have extensive training programs. We have basically an internal relaunch program where people sign up to be able to learn and work on a transition and be able to be placed on a team where they can shadow, grow, and understand. And actually, we've had a lot of success through that program.
Okay. What about at Marine Rescue Technologies and at Lazard?
Yeah. What we found is there actually still is a lot of use for both mentalities in communications today. It hasn't been completely replaced by cloud in all instances. And in our example, we have a mass notification system, and its main benefit or use case to the user is efficiency on offloading some premise use cases. So to us, if it's not so much a matter of moving from one to the other, it's extending one with the other. So we find that for premise communication specifically, that's not going away anytime soon. Even with all the types of cloud communication and systems and collaboration platforms, there's still going to be infrastructure, and there's going to be a need to extend that and offload it, make it more flexible, and interface other systems with it to make a more complete solution. So to us, it's not so much either or moving from one to the other. It's extending one to the other.
Well, I was just going to ask a follow-up, and that being, for those folks that are in the traditional environment that want to move to the new environment, want to develop those skills more quickly, do you have programs in place? Like Ben had mentioned, a relaunch program.
No specific program in place. Now, we're a little bit of a smaller company, but we do, when we look for new talent, we still have our old talent, and they have their skills, and then we've extended new talent to supplement those. So it's not so much a conversion program that we have yet. And as things scale, and things will move more to the cloud, of course, as years go, so that will become a problem for us, I think, in the near future. But so far, specifically with our platform, because it ties still a lot heavily to some premise equipment, then for us, it's it's not as prevalent as some other cloud platforms yet. It's almost like a hybrid solution.
Okay.
I might sound a little harsh in this answer. I don't mean to be. I don't know that this topic is specific to these technologies. I think every organization, my own included, owes it to every employee to help train, develop everyone. But I also think it's at least a 50-50 split on the employee, right? So I remember when I first got into the financial services industry and technology a couple decades ago, and first role I had was working on a foreign exchange trading system. And every foreign exchange trader was terrified because in their minds it was going to replace their job. No, it wasn't going to replace their job. It was going to replace all the paper that they had in front of them every day, right? So every iteration of technology evolution threatens roles, threatens jobs, right? The other day, we're going to be refurbishing one of our offices in Europe, and I'm trying to think about what else can we do differently. So I said to the folks, and I think you mentioned, or maybe we were talking earlier, about the traditional PBX folks, right? I said to them, can you imagine an office with no desk phones? Because there really is no need for a desk phone anymore. I mean, everybody has them. There's no need for speaker phones. I mean, I think some of the best companies in the world have tried to make a speakerphone that's just impossible to use, right? I was in a meeting last week. We finished a conference call, and nobody could hang up the phone because the hang up button was on the second list of LCDs you need to know to go there, right? So we're still fighting the old battles, and I think sometimes people fight the battle that they were fighting 3 or 4 years ago. And I try to, and this is not an easy thing to do, and I don't mean it in a flippant way, but I think everyone should be trying to get out of what they did 3 years ago, right? You should feel accomplished if what you've done was a good or a great success, and now finding a way to maybe even get rid of that system and move on to the next thing. So whether it's telephony, whether it's unified communications, find your way to be part of the next set of ideas. And if you can embed yourself in one of those newer teams, you will learn, right? You can take the classes, your organization should support you in that, but half of it is the desire to want to drive that change. So I don't mean to say it is on every individual, and I don't mean it to be harsh, but that's just the reality.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you grow.
Yeah, Carmine, like to your first point, right, you had kind of alluded to this fact that on a long enough timeline, all technology skills go to zero, right? So
Sure.
every single one. So really, the fact that we're staring at this is absolutely not unique to this industry in any way. I really think it just comes down to being able to separate this idea of talent, which is held by your team members and grown over time, versus skills, which can be learned, can be replaced, can be relearned, and can be updated. So if we really focus on that, I think that we can have a much more healthy conversation about this opportunity in our industry.
Yeah, one thing that we found was getting people to have such an open mind about the new possibilities. We found that people who are around, especially around for some time, are very set in their ways. So you could introduce new technologies, even explain the benefit of them, but get their imagination going on how these new platforms and technologies can be used together, almost like Lego blocks, like when you're a child playing with toys. Try to think outside the box. Certainly, you can't rely on what you've known before, and you have to really get creative.
Just one other, I think people should do is go and, so this is like the hardest thing for an engineer to do, right? Go and talk to somebody they don't know. Just in life, it's hard to do it, right? And then if you've come from an engineering background, you're a software developer, you're an engineer, whatever, it's really hard. Go and talk to somebody in another team. Find out what they're doing. And maybe even talk to somebody outside of the technology organization, somebody in marketing, somebody in the business. Doesn't have to be you don't need to go to the top of the company, right? But it can really open up not just the opportunities, but your thinking, the way you understand the problems that you're trying to solve in the next 3 years. And it sounds like, again, a very high-level, non-technical solution, but it makes a big difference in repositioning yourself.
Well, I wanted to ask earlier, you said that, in your earlier years, you would grab someone and say, let's go. Do you still do that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's usually the person that frustrates me the most. The person that'll be saying, I can't get this done, so-and-so doesn't understand. Okay, why? Well, the email they sent me didn't answer my question. I'm the one with the bad foot right now, right? You can walk with me, right, and go talk to that person. If I can do it, you can try to do it. So I still do it, absolutely. But I have personally no issue with working in our C-suite, but also talking to anybody and everybody. And some people like it, and some people probably aren't so happy about it. But if you do that, and enough people in your organization do that, it really changes the culture.
Yeah, in fact, at Quicken Loans, we try to get ahead of that as well. So something that I would suggest that all of your organizations also steal is in our first 6 months of being a new hire at Quicken Loans, as a technology person, we participate in something called the Passport to the Business, which is an organized program where you go systematically through every single piece of the business, from origination through servicing, everything. And that just pays us huge dividends down the road when your first opportunity is to understand the top to bottom picture.
That sort of fits into a question I wanted to follow up with, was sort of the formalized process. I mean, it's one thing to say individuals need to take this, onus upon themselves. They need to find, what's next in their career, within the company, whatever. But what formalized processes need to be in place to make that an open and encouraging environment to spur that reimagination, as you said, Daryl.
Yeah, what we do sometimes actually is we try to get developers and engineers who are often isolated from the customer and get them on the sidelines on certain customer opportunities, or even bring them to a conference like this so they can get amongst the people, actually see the customer excitement around the solution. Because we'll have development meetings and we'll talk about everything that's going on, but it's easy to get excited when you see it firsthand and you see how excited the customer gets over what you have. So we'll actually involve our engineers on some of the customer side just so they can see how excited people get, and get motivated to want to think more outside the box and want to get customers just as happy and get other people just as excited. So we've found that works very well, getting people to feel like they're involved.
Okay. Carmen, do you?
Again, I'm not a overly formal person. I mean, we post jobs, but to me, it's more about having constant dialogues, constantly engaging. One of the things I don't accept is if somebody wants to move to another team where there's a position, and I've heard the manager has tried to stop it. That's, to me, is just one of the worst things you could possibly do. I mean, in my own career, I think one of the reasons I've been able to have the responsibilities I have today is because the folks, I've been very fortunate in most of my career to work for people who felt it was their job to grow the people that worked for them, to help them take on new opportunities. I think that pays the organization back, and it pays you back as a manager. So that's an informal thing, but if you behave that way, and I've encouraged people throughout my career, I've helped them get roles outside of the technology organization in our own company, because in most cases I'd rather see people stay than go. But I also think it's fine to leave an organization if you're leaving for the right reasons. And if you create a culture that's not punitive in that respect, it's an informal thing, but if you create it as just that's the culture, then it becomes more formal in its own right, and that doesn't really make sense in terms of the terms of the words, but those things make a big difference. If you post jobs and you have a rotation, I think what you do is outstanding. We did that early on. We don't do that as much anymore. All of a sudden, opportunities just open up for people. But we don't do a lot in terms of the formal processes that I think you're alluding to.
Yeah, it doesn't really take as much as you think, too. Just another quick practical tip. One of my favorite things to ask my team members, just on a quarterly basis to check in, is ask them, okay, what one thing are you learning? That's the easy one. What thing are you focused on learning right now? Here's the turn, though. What one thing are you teaching? Because I feel like a lot of team members actually ignore that one or don't pay the same attention that they do to the learning, because a lot of software developers and a lot of folks in technology at all are lifelong learners. That's part of the thing that gets them going, but much less so lifelong teachers. And it really takes both pieces of the puzzle to build a successful organization. So take that home, use that with your teams, tell me how it goes.
Yeah, no, you hit on a good point there. The worst thing that can happen to a developer or an engineer is to become stagnant or unexcited about what they're doing. And that can happen when things don't change very much. So we found that the most productivity we've ever seen, or some of the best or most creative solutions we've seen from our developers, are the ones who are most engaged and are constantly learning, like you said. That's very important to keep things fresh. But once things become stagnant, and then if they can't move to another position, then you run into a problem. So keeping people excited and keeping things changing fast enough where people can't get bored so easily, to us, worked a lot.
I'm curious to find out whether you guys are seeing sort of new job titles, new roles, new responsibilities. I mean, how is the sort of the very nature of an IT organization changing? from that perspective as we go into sort of this build, more of a build mindset?
Well, I've heard with job titles, I find that kind of interesting because you see so many different job titles now that you've never seen years ago. Everything from evangelist to, in my case, I'm a business automation developer, which the acronym is BAD or BAD, so I always thought that was kind of funny. So, titles are actually very subjective these days, but there's so many different types of titles, and, they represent different aspects of the job that didn't exist before, like a cloud story evangelist, someone whose their job is to tell the cloud story. I've never seen that a few years ago, so I think the titles are kind of funny and can be very interesting and also very explanatory. When you see a company with different titles that are creative, it gives you an insight into how that company operates, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. Titles are silly, right? So the job of titles is to convey information external to your organization, right? They're not for internal, inside of your organization. They're for hiring people so that people can understand whether they're qualified for a role and whether this is something that would be interested to you, and also bring that social proof with you when you need to have a discussion outside of your organization. One set of responsibilities that I would like to call out, though, is the product owner, which is kind of, some organizations see that as an evolution of their BA, but that position guarantees that your folks are working on the exact right thing. I think that's a position that really has my attention right now.
So define product owner for us.
Sure, yeah. So product owner is, in some ways, first of all, they are a business expert who is embedded on the technology team to, again, fulfill their key responsibility, which is groom the backlog and make sure that the top item on that list is the most important thing that delivers the most value, right? They are really, in some sense, value brokers. And with that kind of strong keeling of the team, you can avoid some of the problems that we talked about at the beginning, where your team is always executing on the most important thing. So that's where I'm at.
Okay.
I'm stunned at the obsession with titles in the last 3 years, but I think it's exactly what you just said. It's about outward-facing acknowledgement and visibility, and I understand it given where the economy is and where it's going. But I do agree also 100% with the product owner piece, and whether it's interesting. You need to call it out these days. You need to say this is the product owner. But every initiative that I've ever been involved in that's been successful was successful because there was somebody in the role you described. Whether you called it a product owner, not on a business card, you don't use business cards anymore, on LinkedIn, right? Or not. Successful projects have that ownership, and it's not IT only ownership. It's the true delivery of the solution. But yeah, there's a real obsession. Any title with the word transformation or strategy seems to be highly in demand. And I see people inventing titles on LinkedIn. So I'm not quite sure what it does or means, other than people want it. And it's a freebie for the organization to give, but the downside of it is I've seen some bizarre competitiveness starting to happen between people. I joined a year and a half ago. I'm doing the same job the head of or director of this and that is doing. Why don't I have that title? So it starts to create some interesting dynamics internally, but I've not seen this until the last 2-3 years. I don't know what to attribute it to other than LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, that's very true. The invention of titles is very amusing at times because some of them are very creative, but
yeah.
It does make things very disjointed at times if the title isn't clear. So having it being very descriptive and outward-facing, I believe, is very important, regardless of how creative or even if it is a made-up title. If it's descriptive, that helps, but people do operate on titles sometimes more often than focusing on the actual position that they're in.
A title does, though, help that person that wants to reach out to someone in the organization, learn more. I mean, doesn't that help?
I'm not saying there shouldn't be titles, but I think the creativity around titles is the interesting
Too much
part.
license there?
Yeah, a little bit too much license. Where I've seen two hires in the last, I don't know, year-ish, where the sticking point was not compensation, was not it was the wording of the title. And I know that's really important in a lot of organizations. And coming in, you would know it. It's not as critical in our organization, but I've never seen that before, that degree.
And really, the question was really meant to get at what the roles and responsibilities, what kind of
Well, that's what
roles
matters,
and
right?
responsibilities.
The title won't make you successful. roles, responsibilities, and your ability to deliver will make you successful. And I think people forget that.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you attribute some of this to social media and the fact that this is so public now.
I guess. I mean,
Yeah.
what do you guys think?
I mean, for titles, I haven't been so interested in titles except for it being just script. So in my case, business automation developer, my only job really is to automate business processes by bringing together different platforms. So I went for Descript first.
Right.
And it probably is a made-up title, but I did try to be Descript more than...
Well,
than
it makes
coming up with
sense.
a
It shows what you're doing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
When a customer sees that, they know who they're talking to or what the responsibility is.
Yeah, but let's change the game a little bit too, right? I would not recommend that you reach out to a person based on their title if you're looking to learn something, right? That's absolutely not how you should do it. We have to dig deeper. We have to understand what skills they have. I know at Quicken Loans, we developed a product called Sift that's a company directory that has actually tagging mechanism built for everybody's skills. So like, just because you happen to be a senior solutions architect, right? Like, do you know Angular? I'm trying to learn Angular. Like, do you have that knowledge? Because regardless of your title, I need to understand that, and that's how I should choose who is helping me learn.
It's also, how do you define success for yourself, right? If you define success as an accumulation of titles, then yes, that's what you should be focused on, right? You should define what you think will make you, going back to a hippie word, self-actualized, right? In your role over the next 5 years, right? Figure it out and align yourself with that. Whether it's titles, that's fine, but it's skills, it's accomplishment. I'll say a dirty word. It's compensation, perhaps, for people. Money might matter to some people. So in your organization, what are the higher paid roles? How do you get there? What is it? What do you want to become in the next few years? And I think you line yourself around that. And I think titles and responsibilities and that, well, I think they naturally come if you deliver. But again, maybe I work in an industry that's maybe a little bit too leaning toward that, right? You work and you get paid, and then you get more responsibilities. So I'm a little biased that way.
I wanted to quickly get back to your point about product manager. Now that is, or product owner?
I've talked about both. I was talking about the product owner, I bet
Okay,
is
but that's
embedded on the tech team.
right. So kind of taking that a little bit further, so that's a business user, essentially, right? Does that business user who wants to learn how to do some programming and add some communications capabilities into some business process, is that something that you think is a good thing, that you support?
Yeah, indeed. Anytime that we can, I think, Carmine, you had made that point, like anytime that we're able to help get our team members to the next spot and not being prescriptive about what that means, not taking my judgment about where their next role is, but putting in front of them the opportunities that matter to them, we can be infinitely more successful doing that. So yeah, I absolutely see product owners go to tech. I also see our tech people kind of be more interested in engaging with that business, and if they have that capacity, right, they can go that way.
Okay.
It could turn into a business management role. It could be, you could end up being head of a business line eventually, because now you understand the business, you understand the product, you understand the technology, and all businesses are technology, right?
And the security.
And security.
You got to know the security, right?
Yes, and if you can find a business owner who understands security and the importance to your company of security, that person's going to have a great career.
Okay. So we have just a few short minutes left. Obviously, we've had a lot of great advice from you, but let's just go down the line and leave us with your sort of best advice for how to encourage others to sort of embrace the idea of working with APIs, communications APIs in particular, of course, and kind of further where their organizations are going with communications and collaboration because of that.
I think all of those technologies are easily absorbed within a technology organization and not so easily absorbed outside of the engineering places, right, parts of your company. So my advice to people is aligned with a lot of what we've been talking about, which is get out there, figure out where these technologies are applicable outside of your own team's use, right, in your organization. Be a thought leader. Don't be afraid. That's one of the hardest things. Don't be afraid. No one's going to penalize you, hopefully. And if you work in an organization, you get penalized for trying to do something different, you're probably not in a good organization, right? But don't just focus on the technology and its use, because we can all make anything work, and we'll live with all the warts of every technology solution that anybody in this building represents. When you deliver the technology to someone who doesn't do this for a living, they don't understand why we put up with as much as what we do. So if we put ourselves on the other side of the conversation, we can lead from there, and it can really grow careers, right? And you can demonstrate your value using APIs to integrate, pick any 5 products out in the hall, and show a business solution. You're going to differentiate yourself.
Okay. So Daryl and Ben want to just real quick, because we do want to send people off to lunch on time. So.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would say embrace change. That would be the number one, to embrace a communications API, because most people haven't thought outside the box yet. And if you can embrace change quick enough and realize that tomorrow will be different than what's available today, and stay on top of it and always incorporate those new changes, embrace those changes, you will build a solution that in a couple of years all of a sudden was something that you could never even imagined. So I would say keep an open mind and embrace change.
And Ben?
Yeah, I'd say you can't be Batman without a utility belt. So focus on building those tools, right? If you have to get the thing you need every single time, you're not solving the important problems for your business.
Okay. Well, with that, thank you, gentlemen, very much. I appreciate it. Audience, how about we give them a round of applause?